morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is. Thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Don. For you first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and about what it is we've decided to talk about. And this evening, my guest, again, is Dan Meek, and citizen activist and all sorts of stuff he does in his day-to-day existence is just mind-boggling. I admire you so much for the work you do and for the benefit of ordinary citizens. Your work in Salem and other activities, and we'll get into that more later on. So tonight we'll be talking about the PUD, Public Utility District, that's going, a thing that's going on in Oregon. Help me with this.
Well, it's not really a public utility district. That's the problem. It's simply grafting a measure in Portland on the ballot on May 20th to graft on top of the Portland Water Bureau and the Portland Bureau of Environmental Services a new board of directors, which would have big powers and would probably not follow the environmental mandates that the city of Portland is currently following.
Well, thank you for helping me out on that. I had it all butchered. Anyhow, it takes place in Portland in the state of Oregon. And we'll be talking about going on here may apply to you in some other district in the country. So you know what's going on here and how we're doing it. And the other part of the show is going to be about the McCutcheon decision. And we have a lot of discussion about that. And Dan's ready to tell us about McCutcheon and its effects. So, how are you feeling right now?
Pretty good. I'm ready.
You're always ready, Dan.
Got a haircut.
It's so enjoyable to have you on, whatever we're talking about at the time. Among the other things about you is whenever you smile, your whole face goes up. And it makes me want to smile.
All right.
Now you're going to smile, not going to smile. So let's start right in with who you are. Tell us when and where you were born.
Pocatello, Idaho, United States.
United States, okay. And why were you born?
I know that you have a worldwide program, so I have to
Yes, we do,
clarify that.
of course.
All right.
It isn't on Mars, that's right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And why were you born?
My parents wanted another kid, and they wanted a son. They had 2 daughters already.
Okay. What about your national cultural heritage? Anything significant about that? Dan Meek.
Pretty, very consistent Welsh on both sides of the family.
Uh-huh.
My mother's family all came from Wales. In fact, all came from Wales to the United States at exactly the same time on the same boat.
That's unusual.
Well, not exactly, because back in the 1830s and 1840s, the Mormons were recruiting heavily in the British Isles, and they leased giant boats and docked mainly at Liverpool. And so they did a lot of recruiting new members in Wales, and they would fill up the boats and take them to America and dock on the East Coast. They'd take the train out as far as they could in the 1830s or 40s out to the settlement of the Mormons in Nauvoo, Illinois, which at the time was actually the largest city in the West.
Uh-huh.
And then my ancestors got there a little late. They got there a couple of years after the big migration, the big Brigham Young migration from Nauvoo to Salt Lake City area. Mm-hmm. And so they were part of the handcart migration. Mm-hmm. So they walked from Illinois to Utah. They had no oxen or wagons, so they carried their worldly goods in handcarts, which they pushed.
How did you learn all that?
No, it's the Mormons keep very careful track of their genealogy, so it's not hard to figure that out.
So you're a Mormon today?
No, never have been.
So what religion did you have before you became what you are today?
Well, growing up, I was a Presbyterian, and that's because my father worked for the railroad. He worked on Sundays, and he had the only car that the family had. And so in Pocatello, Idaho, there were 30 or 40 Mormon churches, and one Catholic, one Methodist, etc. And so since we weren't Mormons, the only church we could go to was the one we could get a ride to. And some of our neighbors were Presbyterians, and we could get a ride with them on Sunday. So that's became a Presbyterian.
What's your religious orientation today?
None whatsoever.
None, huh?
No.
Are you an atheist, agnostic, or fundamentalist, or what?
I'd say atheist.
Oh, you say that pretty easily. It doesn't make you nervous to say that because we're being monitored, you know.
I think we're being monitored by the NSA. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, my religion is NSA.
Yeah. And your formal education, you're an attorney.
Mm-hmm.
And other education that's worth mentioning. Any other studies you did along the way that would be of interest to the viewers?
My favorite educational institution was the University of Wyoming, where I went as an undergraduate, and it got me into Stanford Law School, strangely enough.
Stanford.
But I certainly appreciated the education at Wyoming.
Uh-huh. And you've been attorneying all these years?
Yes, a lot of years. 37.
So, what kind of work do you do as an attorney nowadays?
36.
How many years?
36.
Oh my gosh.
Well, for many years I've made my living by suing utilities for cheating ratepayers, suing privately owned utilities for not following the law. And I still do some of that, but I also represent political parties now. That is, not the Democrats or Republicans, but what are called third parties, and ballot measure campaigns, and I try to keep the initiative process alive and functioning in Oregon.
Mm. Are you interested in democracy, small d?
That's basically what I work on.
Of course, yeah. And you have a partner, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, cohabitator, or what?
Long-term partner, Linda Williams.
Linda Williams. Uh-huh. And does she like you?
It's getting hard, no.
And are you a right-winger, a Tea Party, or what's your political persuasion?
Well, I'd say I identify most with the Oregon Progressive Party, and I guess if it's the easiest way to know my position on issues would probably be to ask Ralph Nader.
Ralph Nader. Say a few words about the Oregon Progressive Party from the top of your head.
Well, it was created as the Oregon Peace Party in 2008.
Uh-huh.
It places candidates on the ballot for most statewide offices. It meets monthly on the second Tuesday. It is an alternative, obviously, to the Democratic Party.
I am also a member.
And so check out the website, which is progparty.org. Want to take a look at that on the screen. There it is.
There it is. Oh, thank you.
And the policies of the Progressive Party are in favor of such things that the Democrats oppose, like campaign finance reform,
there it is.
single-payer health care. We were in favor of same-sex marriage long before the Democrats were, and it's an alternative.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good. Yeah, yeah. Memberships in political and social and civic organizations. Did we mention that?
Pretty much, Progressive Party is that's one.
Mm-hmm. And persons from the past that you liked or admired. Any of those people alive today? Any names come to mind?
Sure, Ralph Nader, George McGovern.
Uh-huh. Your leftist credentials are pretty on, huh?
Well, maybe populist rather than leftist.
Populist. So what does that mean, populist?
Well, it means basically that I'm in favor of things which are helpful to the average person, and I'm not in favor of things that oppress the average person for the benefit of the wealthy or big institutions.
Okay. So how do you see the mainstream media nowadays? Is that left, right, or centrist, or what? Well,
it's often just inane. Like CNN. I don't know if you ever watch it, but I TiVo some CNN programs during the day. I record them, and then I can go through them very, very rapidly, the whole hour in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And I see now that virtually every minute on CNN is the damn airplane.
For days now.
Oh,
Weeks.
whole month. It's been a whole month. Nothing but that. Nothing but
Inane,
Malaysian Air,
inane.
whatever, you know, and now attempting to, you know, scour the bottom of the ocean for something you'll never find. It's just and that's it. That's the news. There's no other news in the entire world than
It's
that
incredible.
plane.
And they're doing it, and you'd think that they would recognize that people are bored with that.
Right. And the other channels it's, I would also say, inane to maybe a slightly lesser degree. It's content free. It's really just MSNBC is just you know, Democratic Party political slogans. Fox is Republican Party political slogans, and it's just, you don't learn anything. There's very little factual information being presented.
Where do you get your information from that lets you form an
Internet.
informed decision? Internet. Oh.
All internet.
How about alternative media?
What is that?
Internet.
What is the alternative media?
Other than the corporate media.
Well, I think all the alternative media is on the internet.
Yes. So give me an example of a couple of two or three of your favorite sites on the internet that you gather information from.
Well,
There's so many good ones.
Yeah,
RSN and Common Dreams and.
New York Times.
You trust what you get from the New York Times on the internet?
I guess I believe the factual information that comes through the New York Times.
Does the New York Times have any bias?
The editorial board certainly has a bias. I don't know if the reporter's bias is something that I can discern. Another site I look at a lot now is the Guardian.
Okay.
From Britain, because because of its role in breaking the NSA information.
What's most important nowadays to pay attention to? What comes to mind? What's most important nowadays to pay attention to? In a global sense.
Well, from my perspective, what is very irksome is the degree to which people are persuaded by paid advertisements, paid political advertisements. So one of my functions is to try to get people to who are being inundated with those ads to act in a way that they don't act now. That is, now the information becomes internalized. And then they go to the ballot box and say, "Oh, I've heard about Joe Blow. I think I'll vote for him." I would like them to internalize it differently. I've heard about Joe Blow. I'm going to vote against him. Because I realize that it's the money. The reason I know about him is because the money paid for the big money paid for the ads that I heard.
But that isn't usually available, that people aren't aware that big money is paying for the ads. How do we remind people of that fact?
That is my task.
Mm-hmm. And
is
being
to
on
get people
shows
informed that that if you're looking at the ballot and you have no personal knowledge or personal involvement in the campaign or particular issues, and you see a name that you recognize, vote for somebody else, and always vote for the third party candidate.
Okay, what's right with America? Give me a couple, 3 things that's right with our country.
Wow.
Hard to find anything,
It's hard.
right?
Well, it's just that other countries do most of what we do, but do it better. That's why on most measures of social welfare, the United States is not in the top 10 or top 20 or even top 30. What the United States used to do back in the 50s and 60s was present a society of opportunity where you could actually become a success. Now, it's a lot more difficult. Like when I went to college, I can't even remember what the tuition was at the University of Wyoming because it was so small. My last year at Stanford Law School, I thought the tuition was outrageous, absolutely outrageous. It was $3,000. And I paid all of that by working in the economics department there and as a debate coach at Stanford, so it actually didn't cost me anything. Now I'm told that the tuition for 1 year at a private school can be as high as $60,000.
Unbelievable.
And that and even public school tuition is $10,000 a year. So people are coming out of school with tremendous debt, which means they have to go to work for the big companies to pay off their debt. And once you get into that, you're sort of trapped.
Give me 2 or 3 examples of what's wrong with America today.
The McCutcheon decision that we'll be talking about.
All right.
Unlimited money in political campaigns. Very much growing inequality. The reduction in opportunity for the average person, resulting in such things as increases in drug addiction, alcoholism, destroyed families. State-sanctioned gambling is another blight on America.
My gosh, I asked for 2 or 3 and you gave me 10. And we don't have 3 hours because I was going to ask you what can we do to fix what's wrong with America, but it'll take quite a bit of time.
You'll have to have me back for that.
Yeah. Okay. So let's take a break early so that we can have enough time to talk about the issue with Oregon here and say it again.
It's called the Water District Measure. The Portland Water District Measure.
Portland Water District Measure and McCutcheon. So can we take a break early, Mr. E? And that's the time we have left for the show, and that's his clock time in the red below there. So explaining to Dan how this system works here. You're so fun to be with, yeah. We're back. Thanks for staying tuned, and for you viewers who missed the opening of the show, Conversations with Dr. Don that you're watching is an ongoing series of 1-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like my friend Dan Meek here about who he is as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals. And we're going to be talking about the topic of the show tonight. Okay, shall we take off again and start the
Portland Water District Measure.
Portland Water District Measure.
Right. One of the an item that will be on the ballot for voters in Portland on May 20th, primary election, is the creation of a water district, and this isn't. It's portrayed by the supporters as, oh, having a public utility district or a people's utility district, as it's called in Oregon, but it really isn't that. I've been involved for over 25 years in creating people's utility districts and other utilities in Oregon, other publicly owned utilities. Back in 1987 and 88, Linda Williams and I were the attorneys to create the Oregon Trail Electric Cooperative that then bought out the CP National Electric System in Eastern Oregon, and it's got about 60,000 customers now and is the largest co-op in Oregon. And then we tried to form PUDs, People's Utility Districts, here in this area to take over PGE, both in 1987 and then again in 2002 and through 2004 when PGE, Portland General Electric, was owned by Enron.
Why do you want to set up PUDs?
Well, because I think it's a government-owned natural monopolies are better than private-owned natural monopolies. The privately owned natural monopoly can charge basically anything it wants. Its rates are nominally, or in theory, set by a public utility commission, but I believe that the utilities themselves control the Public Utility Commission through their campaign contributions to the folks who who appoint the commissioners and who confirm the commissioners, that is the governor and the Oregon State Senate. And so the private utilities make a tremendous amount of profits, and publicly owned utilities, particularly in the Pacific Northwest, have far lower rates, not only because they don't have the need to satisfy shareholders with profits or executives with tremendous salaries and bonuses, but they also are able to buy power from the federal government at much lower rates. So that's something I've been doing, and so it's sort of offensive to me that this effort in Portland is being called a public utility district effort when it's not that at all. It's simply grafting a different governing structure on top of what's an existing government-owned utility, and that is the City of Portland's Water Bureau, which provides water, and the City of Portland's Bureau of Environmental Services, which provides sewer service in Portland. And so this is not, an exercise of public power or public utilities. It's just an exercise in changing the governing structure of existing publicly owned utilities. The reason for doing that is that recently in Portland we've seen quite rapidly rising utility bills, as this chart indicates that since 2007 the combined water and sewer charges in Portland have gone up from an average of about $59 per month to $89 a month.
Just in 7 years.
Just in 7 years. And so that's not pleasing to many people. Of course, the main reason for that is that our sewer system is dilapidated and requires replacement, and also the federal government required that we separate the sewer system from the stormwater system, so that when we get big rains here, and when that happens, until the big pipe was built at a cost of $1.5 billion, the stormwater would run through the sewers would overflow, and a whole bunch of sewage would get dumped into the Willamette River.
Where we get our water from?
Where we get our we get our water
Bull
from
Run.
the Bull Run system.
Yeah.
But there are fish in the Willamette, and obviously runs into the Columbia, and we don't want a whole bunch of sewage in there anyway.
Okay.
So the Portland had to invest $1.5 billion for the big pipe, and of course we have to pay off the bonds for the big pipe.
And the big pipe is, a few words about that?
It is a system to separately collect stormwater runoff and not run it through the same sewer that is connected to our toilets. And it required a giant amount of construction and the laying of new pipe all over the place.
So that what goes into the Willamette will be treated or handled differently? So
that the sewage from our toilets and homes and businesses will always go to the treatment plant, and all will be treated first. And the stormwater will go, won't go into the treatment plant and overwhelm the treatment plant and cause the treatment plant to have to spill combined stormwater and sewage into the river.
Thanks for your patience with me. I have a lot of viewers in there who are around my age, not quite as old, but we need to be explained very carefully. Thank you.
All right.
Please go on.
Well, it turns out that Portland's rates aren't that far out of line with other cities. This is a chart of other cities, and Portland's right about in the northwest in Oregon, and Portland's right about in the middle when it comes to water charges. And as this table indicates, that Portland is actually quite a bit lower than many of the cities on the Oregon coast. Nevertheless, the rates have gone up, and the proponents of the measure have attributed these rate increases to things that really haven't caused them, and that is the use by the City of Portland, or the investment of the City of Portland in measures, for example, to conserve water, or to reduce runoff by building bioswales, by buying some land to use as for filtration for water systems, etc. And they focused on things like, Portland built a demonstration house, the Water House, to demonstrate water conservation techniques, and it was a fiasco. It cost $1 million to build, and then they finally had to sell it for only $300,000. So, but that when you consider the fact that that the budget of the Water Bureau and the sewer system in Portland is somewhat over $500 million a year, that really isn't what has caused the rate increases. And also, people were not happy by the City Council's decision to fluoridate the water in Portland. And part of the sort of populist movement against the city council was to subject that to referendum, and the fluoridation lost by a vote of about 60% to 40%, even though the supporters of fluoridation spent a lot more money on that campaign. So I think what's happened is that the corporations, the large water users in Portland, are using this populist feeling against the Portland Water Bureau. They're opportunistically using it to try to change the governing structure of the Portland Water Bureau to graft a 7-person elected board onto the top of the Water Bureau. But it would be elected under a system of no limits on political campaign contributions or expenditures.
So they can buy it.
Well, I think that's the plan. Right now, the effort to pass this ballot measure has been funded about 99.5% by big corporate water users and water polluters in Portland. Here's a list of the biggest donors to the committee in favor of this measure. Siltronic is by far the largest water user of the city of Portland, and the Portland Bottling Company is also a large one, as are basically everyone on this list. And so the large water users are funding this effort, and that is exactly what they could do when it comes to electing the seven board members. Here's another committee that there are actually 2 political committees that are the yes committees, and again, it's basically the same cast of characters of the large water users. There's a list of the water users there. So if elected under a system of no limits on contributions or expenditures, you would expect the large water users to fund those campaigns, and most people, the only folks they'll hear about is the people that come to them by means of paid advertising. Now, currently, I'm not a big defender or a defender at all of the Portland Water Bureau at this point. It is controlled by the elected city council, which is also elected under a system of no limits on political campaign contributions or expenditures. But water is not the central issue in those races. And as a result, the generally liberal electorate of Portland means you get a generally environmentally aware city council. Mm-hmm. I think if you have folks voting only on water issues, or the folks that are running for the water board, you'll have a generally less environmentally progressive board. And there are also other features of this measure that make it bad news. It prohibits nearly anyone with any experience with the Portland water and sewer systems from serving on the board. But of course, it allows the big water users themselves, the corporate executives, to serve on the board. It prohibits any audits of the board and its operations by the City of Portland or the city auditor or any other government body. The only audit of the system will be by the new elected board itself. It allows this board to issue general obligation bonds, which must be repaid by City of Portland taxpayers, even though the city cannot disapprove the bonds. Finally, one thing to keep in mind is that the attorney for this measure is John DiLorenzo, a longtime acquaintance of mine, who is the attorney who always is the attorney to challenge any campaign finance limitations that is enacted by the voters or the legislature in Oregon. He's been doing
There's a
that for the
thread
past
to all
20
of this:
years.
money, money, money.
That's right. It's all money, and as a result of that, there's a lot of groups that are against this measure. Here are just a few of them on this slide. Sierra Club, basically all of the labor unions, the Oregon Progressive Party, of course, on the top of this list, mm-hmm. Oregon Consumer League, many others, the Oregon Environmental Council, the Oregon League of Conservation Voters, more labor unions there, more and more labor unions. I think it's all labor unions. Uh-huh. Alliance for Democracy, a very great organization. Mm-hmm. Even the Democratic Party of Multnomah County, and Common Cause, and various other organizations. So uh-huh. It's definitely a measure that needs to be defeated. It's measure 26-156. So Portland voters should vote no.
All right, very good. So much for that?
So much for that.
All right, well, Shall we take a breath and go into McCutcheon? I want to hear about that
Yes.
because I told my crew you were going to talk about McCutcheon, and they said, let's get to it. They're just excited about it. So
what
am
is
I.
it?
What do you, Dan Meek, know about creating a public utility district? We talked about that.
Right.
And now, what is McCutcheon? And I Googled that, and I've got it here, but it's still not too easy for me to talk about. So maybe you tell us what the McCutcheon thing is.
It is a decision that came out last week by the United States Supreme Court, another in a series of 5-4 decisions by the court involving laws that were passed by Congress to limit political campaign contributions and expenditures in federal races, that is, races for, for the presidency of the United States and for the United States Congress. The Supreme Court majority of 5-4, the 5 were all appointed by the Republican presidents. They were appointed by Ronald Reagan, George Bush the first, George Bush the second, constitutes the five votes. The 4 votes were the folks who were nominated to the court by Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. But this, it's kind of, I find it interesting, these 5-4 decisions. You know, the decisions of the Supreme Court are all cloaked in, oh, well, we're not making law, we're just finding the law. We're just, you know, interpreting what Congress has done. Well, you would think that if that's all they were doing, that they would have more consistent agreement. There wouldn't be 5-4 every time.
So the first decision was the Citizens United.
Well, let's go back to McCutcheon for a second and indicate what that does. The Citizens United decision, by the way, said this was 2 years ago, pardon me, 4 years ago. It was in January 2010. Under that decision, it struck down the federal laws which banned corporations and unions from making what are called independent expenditures in candidate races, that is, to help or oppose candidates for federal office.
And
that had been banned by the McCain-Feingold
and money is speech, right?
Well, they never said that. Still, the U.S. Supreme Court has never said that. It's come close to saying it, but it never has actually said that. As a result of the Citizens United decision, by the way, as this chart indicates, the spending by conservative nonprofit organizations on federal campaigns skyrocketed later in 2010. The Citizens United decision was in January 2010, so the first time it was in effect was for the 2010 races on that chart. So the conservative spending went way up in 2010 and even farther up in 2012.
As a result of that decision.
As a result of that decision, there's another chart indicating the red are the conservative groups that massively ratcheted up their independent spending. Before Citizens United, most of independent spending on federal candidate campaigns was for Democrats, by the way. And so the Democrats, once Citizens United came out in January 2010, you might recall, Democrats had overwhelming majorities in both the Senate and the House in 2010, and also they had the presidency. They could have done something about Citizens United.
So they outspent
the
Democrats.
By a simple law, they could have removed the jurisdiction of the United States Supreme Court to decide or to overturn campaign finance reform statutes. But instead, while they had these huge majorities in both the House and Senate, the Democrats, including a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate, they did absolutely nothing about it. And my theory is the reason they did nothing about it is because they were getting more money in independent expenditures than the Republicans were.
From the rich.
And so they figured, well, it's no harm to us. But of course, once the limits were off for corporations, the corporations poured the vast majority of their money into races for Republicans, and using that money took over the United States House of Representatives, which now makes it virtually impossible for Congress to do anything about it.
And those people who speak for the citizenry in Washington, D.C. get most of their money from the super rich.
Well, and from corporations.
And corporations.
And the super rich. And so McCutcheon decision is sort of phase 2 of that. And what the court overturned were what are called the aggregate limits on contributions. apply to individuals. Under the existing law, an individual, any individual person, could not contribute more than, in any given election cycle, which is 2 years, couldn't contribute more than essentially $65,000 to a national party committee, and plus they couldn't contribute more than certain amounts in the aggregate to candidates. So and that's $48,000. So the aggregate number that an individual could actually contribute in all federal races, all put together in a given year, was $123,000. Mm-hmm. Under McCutcheon, however, the amount that an individual can contribute to candidates is essentially totally unlimited, because it says you can contribute the $2,600 to every candidate in the primary, to every candidate in the general. You can contribute $64,000 to every national party committee, $20,000 to every state party, $10,000 to any and all political action committees. And so it turns out that you can, simply because there's a proliferation of political action committees and you can contribute to all of them, you can contribute effectively an infinite amount. So it effectively eliminates the limits on political campaign contributions directly to candidates
so they can
and
really
parties.
Buy in spades what they were buying before.
Right. And an interesting part of the decision is how contradictory it is to Citizens United. In Citizens United, the 5-4 majority said, as this slide indicates, that, well, these independent expenditures aren't really corruption. They're not going to cause the candidate who benefits from them to favor the persons or corporations who made the expenditures, because as the court said, the absence of prearrangement and coordination undermines the value of the expenditure to the candidates and alleviates the danger that the expenditures will be given as a quid pro quo for improper commitments by the candidate. So it's saying, oh, no. Independent expenditures doesn't have a corrupting influence on the candidate. Okay? So then, in oral argument in McCutcheon, Justice Scalia then said, well, it seems to me fanciful to think that the sense of gratitude that an individual senator or congressman is going to feel because of a substantial contribution to the political party or to themselves is any greater than the sense of gratitude that the senator or congressman will feel to a PAC which is spending enormous amounts of money in his district or state for his election. And Justice Kennedy, who wrote Citizens United, said, you have two persons. One gives an amount to a candidate that's limited. The other takes out ads uncoordinated just on his own, costing $500,000. Don't you think that second person has more access to the candidate? So basically they're saying that now that we created this Citizens United loophole, now we can say, well, because independent expenditures, the person who's making them, the corporation making them, really has no influence on the candidate. And now, oh, wait a minute, they do have influence with the candidate, and so we might as well have unlimited contributions directly to the candidate because the horse is already out of the barn, basically. So, anyway, it also illustrates that Supreme Court decisions are purely political, and that consistency doesn't make any difference.
Well, isn't the court supposed to be objective?
That's the myth. That is the creation myth of the courts, is that they're objective. And
so the justices are not objective.
The justices are not objective. That's correct.
What are we going to do about that?
Well, there were things that the Congress could have done about it back in 2010, as I mentioned here. This slide indicates the response by Congress to the Citizens United case. It's blank. They did absolutely nothing. They could have passed a simple law to restrict the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court to review cases, to review laws, campaign finance reform laws.
Can they do that?
They can absolutely do that. It's called the Exceptions Clause. They've done that repeatedly, as this slide indicates. They've done it. The Illegal Immigration Reform Act of 1986 removed the jurisdiction of the federal courts to review immigration and naturalization service decisions, some of them. Prison Reform Litigation Act did it in 1996. The False Claims Act expressly removes the jurisdiction of the courts to review certain decisions
Couldn't
by...
they appeal to the Supreme Court?
Well, no, because the Supreme Court's jurisdiction is defined by Congress.
Yes, of course.
And Congress can, as Justice Scalia himself stated, that in reviewing the Detainee Treatment Act of 2005, that under that act, no court shall have jurisdiction to hear or consider an application for habeas corpus filed by an alien detained at Guantanamo Bay. And Justice Scalia said, the aptly named exceptions clause of Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution, which in making our appellate jurisdiction subject to such exceptions and under such regulations as the Congress shall make, explicitly permits exactly what the Congress has done here. So Congress can limit the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. Congress defines the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. But back in 2010, when they had the opportunity to do that, they did not do it. And now, of course, the Republican majority in the House of Representatives will not allow them to do it.
What can we do nowadays?
Well, let me mention one other thing that sort of skipped over here, and that is this decision, the McCutcheon decision, not only affects federal political contests, that is for Congress, it also affects many states. About 12 different states have limits, aggregate limits on political campaign contributions that any individual can make during an election cycle or during a year. Unfortunately, that slide seems to be missing, but those limitations will also now quickly come down under the rationale of the U.S. Supreme Court that limiting the total amount of money that an individual can contribute to all political candidates or parties during any period of time is an unconstitutional restriction on freedom of speech.
Whoa.
So it's going to affect not only races for the presidency and Congress, but it's also going to affect races for state office in those states.
It seems like it's almost an impossible task to take on. So what about the constitutional amendment?
Well, that's another thing that could be done. That's going to be quite a bit more difficult even than getting, of course, Congress to pass a law to remove the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. There are many very admirable groups pursuing a constitutional amendment, like the Move to Amend national organization, in which Oregon plays a prominent role, and with the Alliance for Democracy here in David Delk. Mm-hmm. However, that's going to be extremely difficult. In order to amend the United States Constitution, the first thing, one way to do it is to have 2/3 of each House of Congress adopt an amendment and send it out to the states for ratification. Mm-hmm. And it requires 3/4 of the states to ratify, which means 38 states.
That's a lot of work.
And when you think back to the fact that John McCain won 24 states, and I think Mitt Romney won 22 states or 23 states, that finding 38 states to ratify such an amendment is going to be difficult. You would need to get states that are either Mountain West states that are very heavily Republican, or Southern states that are very heavily Republican to ratify it, which does not seem to be likely. No. In addition, the other way, in addition, you need a 2/3 vote in both the Senate and the House. That's certainly not likely in either the Senate or the House.
Sure.
Another way to get a constitutional amendment started is for the states. I have to remember whether it's the majority of the states or 2/3 of the states. I think it's just the majority of the states call for a constitutional convention. And of course, that requires action by a majority of the state legislatures, and that's something Move to Amend is working on. But even so, even when that constitutional convention is called, the result of that convention is, it depends on who gets appointed by the state legislatures to the convention. And the convention might do nothing. The convention might make the Constitution worse. Let's assume, however, that it made the Constitution better, and it said that limits on political campaign contributions and expenditures are not, don't violate free speech. and can be adopted by legislatures, then that amendment then still has to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. So the more likely way that these decisions will be overturned is by attrition. It depends on which Supreme Court justices die first.
And then who appoints the next?
And who appoints the next ones, that's right.
And influence of money and corporations and the super rich in this entire process?
Well, they will be able to exercise their new power to make unlimited contributions and unlimited expenditures in the next presidential race.
And then do we have a democracy anymore?
That's highly doubtful. And also they will be able to make those contributions and expenditures in races for the Senate, and of course the Senate has to confirm appointees to the Supreme Court. So I guess there are turning points in history, and I would say one turning point was the year 2010. The Citizens United decision came out, was widely expected to come out the way it did, and Congress took no action, even though there were 60 votes in the Senate were Democrats, and they had about a 60% majority in the House. They did nothing, and as a result of that, Republicans won the House, and now basically the amount of money in federal political races is unlimited, so that the opportunity for, it's kind of a catch-22 now. You have no opportunity to limit money because the unlimited money will elect folks who will not vote to limit money.
So we're stuck.
We're stuck unless suddenly a whole bunch of the 5-4 majority in these decisions, they all retire, or some of them retire, or they pass on. They pass away.
And even
However,
if they pass
the
away,
average age of the Democrat appointees is higher than the average age of the Republican appointees. So it's more likely to go in the wrong direction.
you're going to have rich legislatures deciding who's going to be on the Supreme Court. It seems like we're heading down a dead-end street. There's been, some say there's a revolution still going on in America. And is there a possibility of a revolution or a revolt by the populace?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the one other method of addressing this would be for people to understand that they're being inundated with political ads in campaigns, both for in candidate races and in ballot measure races, and to have a deeper understanding of what that means. That is, if you see an ad that says that Mary Jones is the greatest thing ever, and you see that ad over and over and over again, and in races for state and local office, every day you go out to your mailbox and you get a giant brochure, a giant color brochure about how great Mary Jones is for this office, and radio ads and everything. And so the delightfulness of Mary Jones is drummed into your head.
Yeah.
Then you have to realize, I need to vote against Mary Jones.
You have to realize that the you you're talking about will not have the kind of information that you and I are sharing right now.
Right.
So it sounds like it's a futile attempt.
Well, I'm going to work on putting up websites that will provide much greater information than is currently available to voters. Current information, right now, for example, if you want to know who's contributing money or spending money on Oregon races, you can go to the Oregon Secretary of State's website. But it's very complicated, and you don't really get the picture of who are the big contributors, and you have to dig around for it. There's an organization called the National Institute for Money and State Politics, which is a nonprofit organization in Helena, Montana, that does a much better job of showing this information in a way that's understandable. But they are trying to compile the information in all 50 states, and they get behind. They're not current.
How are you going to get the ordinary citizenry to go to the site you're talking about?
Maybe we send big color postcards to every citizen that says, if you want to know where the money's coming from for each candidate, go to this site. And we go on the Dr. Don show. We say, here's the website you go to, doesn't exist yet, folks, to see who's really backing these candidates and how much money they're spending on them.
Who's the we that are going to send out these postcards?
Progressive Party of Oregon would be one organization that could do that.
You think we could cover enough people to have some sort of an impact?
Yeah. I mean, that's what we have to do.
What I'm arguing about is what I think is going to be the solution that we've had in the past for that kind of absolute injustice.
Direct action.
When all else fails, nonviolent direct action is mandatory. It's worked before, and that, to me, there's no other alternative anymore.
Well, we will put you in a sandwich signboard with the website address on it, so people will see what it is. But they have to. But they have. What I'm trying to say is they have to get the average person to understand. If I'm being inundated with information about how wonderful a candidate is in these paid advertisements, I have to realize why I'm being inundated with this information, and who benefits from inundating me with this information, and then vote for somebody else.
I'm suggesting that this is the last time I'm going to try this. The average person is not going to get the information that you want them to have. It takes money.
It'll be very difficult, yes.
Okay. So you don't like my idea of taking to the streets?
Well, I like your idea of taking to the streets, but how many people are going to see you in the streets?
I'm not sure how it happened in the past, but it has happened in the past successfully. Gandhi, MLK, women's suffrage, Vietnam War.
You know, let's assume that we're back in the 1960s now, 50s and 60s, and MLK and many others are on the streets. Is the news going to even cover it now? Are they going to cover it, or are they going to cover some airplane crash that happened a month ago?
How many years did it take for the media to finally cover what was really going on and the lies about Vietnam?
Well, did they ever cover that?
Yes, they did.
Eventually.
When the pictures came back, this is why nowadays they censor the media, and you got to be embedded to report a little of the truth of what's going on in these wars.
Right. Now, is that happening in Afghanistan?
If people eventually historically they've turned around. I can't go into the details of how it will happen, but it will happen. It has always happened. And wish we had another hour to talk about Crimea and what's going on over there too, and what's going on.
Well, I hope it will happen, and I would say that the best prospect is the existence of the internet. I don't think the paid media will do it.
Okay.
I think if our paid media was in the 1950s, the civil rights movement wouldn't be covered. I mean, they'd spend all of their time on the moon landing or something that is innocuous and that doesn't offend their corporate sponsors.
The moon landing was staged, didn't you know that? There was
Which
no
one?
Moon well, I like challenging you. It makes you think, and you give me more information about what's going on. But I'm at the end of my rope now, and I'm at my age anyhow. I don't have many years to hang around and see things change, and things have to change. Things have changed terrifically from the time I was a little kid, but I want to see more change. We're heading in the wrong direction now from the time of the 50s and the 60s. We got to stop that direction where bottom line is people are getting poorer, and the rich are getting richer, and we've got to change that direction and go the other way.
Agreed.
Social responsibility. So
well, but it's not going to happen with our existing political system.
You're going to vote for Hillary in the next election?
No.
There's a quick answer.
The next election would be, where she would be running, would be the primary election in 2016. I'm not a Democrat, so I couldn't vote for her anyway.
You're going to re-register?
No.
I'm aware the time is running out. There must be some kind of a message you can give to our viewers about what we've talked about so far tonight, or anything else that would be of use for them to make our democracy work and to have our country be what it should be.
Well, I would say
talk to camera 3.
Check out progparty.org. That's where I put a lot of the things, or some of the things that I work on, plus other interesting or comical, satirical pieces. And But with the decisions by the U.S. Supreme Court, you know, democracy in this country is in grave peril.
Yeah.
I recently spoke with folks who live in England. They couldn't believe the way the American system works. Over there, they have public funding of elections. They have very strict limits on any amount of private money that can be spent in elections. Their equivalent of congressional elections happen in a couple of weeks.
Uh-huh.
It's completely different.
And each individual can do something. There's a whole number of things you can do to resist and say no, 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 and not just wearing signs out in public as I do, and that's okay, but talk to people that you run into and run the risk of offending them. There's a whole lot of things that we can do other than just sit and watch it happen. So it looks like we're running out of time because Ellery, my director, is going to beat me up if we don't stop. Shall we shut down now, Mr. E, with some public service announcements? To watch my shows on the web, Google Don Baham YouTube, and you can see a whole bunch of my shows from the past. And the American Civil Liberties Union is much needed nowadays because our civil liberties are in jeopardy. Go to the ACLU and learn how to join. And corporate person, third, go to movetoamend.org to amend. Learn more about humanists and humanism, go to the AmericanHumanist.org website, learn more about humanism. To learn more about the Alliance for Democracy, that great organization, go to the national website at thealliancefordemocracy.org and the Portland, Oregon website at www.afd-pdx.org. And remember KFC, I gotta remember to tell you that KFC, not Kentucky Fried Chicken, Dr. Don's KFC, kind, friendly, and charitable. Be kind, be friendly, and be charitable. To you too. You too. And you too, Mikey. Thanks again for watching, and good night.